cool.
Hi, Eric. Hi, Ryan.
It says meeting is now streaming on Facebook.
Really?
That means something is going right. That's good.
Victory.
Good job.
Hi,
I have to shut this light off. I forgot.
It is. Look.
Yay.
And then I'm
That's
recording here. Okay, look at this. Here we
So,
go. This is
so
great.
the
A little
lecture is
too meta
going
for
on
me,
Facebook
RB.
now?
So anytime anyone talks, we can actually see your face live on the Facebook
Oh
screen.
God, I'm going to stop.
So just FYI. Oops, I'm on there now.
Okay, let Dr. Ervine take over and the rest.
Well, so now that I've pressed record and live on Facebook, we'll get officially started here. And hopefully if other people join, they can nicely come on in and it will hopefully work for everybody. But I see a lot of people with video. I see a lot of people who plugged the meeting ID and password incorrectly. So I think we're doing pretty good here. That's pretty thrilling to be at 25 of us right now. Just briefly, I will kind of welcome everybody. And first, I just want to say, first, thank you to Dr. Ervine, who agreed to be the sort of guinea pig for this. You know, she was scheduled actually last Thursday, and it became apparent pretty quickly that we were not going to all be sitting in G Hall together. And I kind of let it slide for a little. And then only about 10 days ago, I said, so what do you think about trying to do it online? And she said, let's do it. So first and foremost, thank you to Dr. Ervine for being willing to take it online, because it's what we've all been doing, but it's still not, you know, I've taught now, I've been in meetings on Zoom, but every activity that goes on Zoom is still a little bit different. So I appreciate your willingness to try it out here. I think most of you know me, but one of the cool things, if there is a silver lining in all of this, it's that actually our reach extends beyond G Hall in the diocesan center and beyond, you know, the boroughs and the, you know, whether Westchester is the 6th borough or New Jersey is the 6th borough or whatever, but it extends well beyond our normal geographic reach. And so that is the sort of the silver lining in all of this. So I will go ahead and introduce myself. I am Dr. Christopher Sheklian. I get to say that. I'm the director of the Zorab Information Center, which on normal occasions is open to the public Monday to Friday with a collection of over 40,000 cataloged items, books, music, all kinds of stuff. And, you know, we're part of the Eastern Diocese of the Armenian Church of America. And we sit on the diocesan complex. And for those of you that are joining us from further away, we hope that you can join us physically at some point. But in the meantime, this is pretty cool. So the other thing I will say by way of introduction is that these enrichment evenings have been a staple of the Zorab Information Center's programming for many, many years, well before I was here. I think even before Bishop Daniel, who was the previous director, was the director. These have been a long-standing activity of the Zorab Information Center. My tiny little innovation in the past year or so that I've been here is to try to organize, in addition to, say, you know, book releases, things like that, thematic series. So we've had a number of series. We did one on migration, one on monasticism, and currently the winter spring 2020 programming is under the heading of the theme of the environment. Now, for those of you who have not been following along with us, this might sound a little strange, but a lot of different Christian denominations in the past, say, 20 plus years now, have really sort of been thinking about what it means to sort of engage with God's creation from a Christian perspective. Whether that be, you know, sometimes it's called eco-theology, environmental theology, green theology. Different denominations have called it all kinds of different things. But the point is a recognition that there is a kind of Christian understanding of the created world and our responsibility towards it. And a lot of different Christian denominations have kind of developed what that view would look like. And actually, the Eastern Orthodox Church has been one of the leaders in this thinking. The ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew I is known as the Green Patriarch because he supported so many initiatives. Pope Francis now, I believe it was his second encyclical, was called Laudato Si, Care for Our Common Home, which was a kind of environmental grappling. So what I wanted to do with this series is actually push the Armenian Church to do some of this thinking as well. And all of the lectures in this series so far, which has been myself and Deacon Alex Chalikian, have been live streamed on Facebook. So they are still up there. So you can sort of watch through the series to get a sense of exactly what it is that I've had in mind with organizing this series. And again, I can be very grateful to Dr. Ervine because when I was sort of putting this together, I was like, okay, but who does, we don't have a lot of people actually doing this. And so I more or less commissioned her. I said, so what if I ask you to sort of take a look at a text and think through it with this lens for us? And as per usual, she thought for a second and she said, yeah, okay, I could do that. And no one here would be surprised to know that she sort of immediately said, oh yeah, I could do that. So again, another thanks to Dr. Ervine. So that's the sort of the big picture of where tonight's evening falls in this larger thematic. So without too much further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Roberta Ervine, who I know many of you know. Many of you have been taught by her. She is currently professor of Armenian studies at St. Narcissus Armenian Seminary. If I tried to list all of the classes even that I have sat in or taken with her, the list would get very long very quickly. But we can say that among many of her specialties, she focuses a lot on the medieval Armenian theological tradition, especially related to exegesis. She's worked on grammarians, all kinds of things, but we can say that is kind of a lot of her focus. But of course, anybody who has had the pleasure of sitting in one of her classes knows that her expertise extends well beyond that narrow definition. And so I am very, very thrilled to have Dr. Roberta Ervine here being our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate the introduction. As we all know, Lent has just ended, technically speaking, and we're now in Holy Week, which is, the slides are not moving. Oh, I see. Okay, we'll start again. Holy Week is just Lent's more stringent, more demanding, and if you're going to follow or participate in all of the available services, Lent's more tiring culmination. And we can tend to think of this whole pre-Easter period as one of deprivation. And so we might balk at that for whatever personal reasons we have. And actually, now that I think of it, maybe it would be fun some other time to look at how the fathers describe all of the inventive ways that people in earlier centuries came up with to avoid doing real fasting while appearing to fast, keeping the letter of the fasting regulations more or less, while totally gutting their intent. But that's for another day. This time of deprivation is symbolized visually to us by the curtain that deprives us of the altar. And most of us who are watching the services online this year feel even more deprived than ever. However, these weeks before Easter are not about deprivation. For some people, the word restraint gets a little closer to the meaning we want it to have. But while deprivation and restraint can both be helpful entry-level understandings of Lent and Holy Week and Armenian fasting in general, there's much more to it than that. In his letter to the Georgians, calling for inter-Christian tolerance and dialogue, the great 12th century Armenian Vartabed, jurist, and author of fables, Mkhitar Ghosh, praised the good characteristics of all the local Christian confessions, wanting to show how everyone can learn from the other's faith. And so he says the following. Antagonistic though they sometimes were towards Armenians, he said, having heeded John Chrysostom, Greeks are wise and compassionate. Roman Catholics are prompt in prayer and submissive to their primates. Syrians are humble and ascetic. Georgians honor saints and monasteries and do not speak ill of their primates. All of these are worthy Christian qualities from which Armenians, Mukhtar added, could learn a thing or two. And then Mukhtar proudly adds his own nation's admirable, emulable characteristics. He says, Armenians fast. They also show generous charity toward captives and clergy, and they love all things holy. You notice how he put fasting first on that list? He wasn't kidding about that either. If we were to put together all of the fasting days in the Armenian calendar as a block, they would amount to around 5 months, a little less than half the year. That is a lot of time to designate for fasting, which, as you know, in current Armenian practice, means a vegan diet without alcohol. Yeah, I know. Alcohol technically is a plant food. Life is not fair, nonetheless. By including alcohol on the list of things one does not ingest while fasting, Armenians who actually follow their own liturgical calendar get to detox regularly. And this, as I'm sure you've noticed, is a very trendy thing to do these days. You just go online, you look for cleanse, and you'll see what I mean. There's the juice cleanse, the skinny cleanse, the 3-day detox me cleanse, the colon cleanse, the faster cleanse, the list goes on. In other words, something people in the West are just discovering is really good for you, especially if you regularly eat processed foods or consume adult beverages. Armenians have been doing a stellar job of it for a couple millennia. Plus, fasting was a frequently prescribed remedy in ancient medicine. So we moderns are coming pretty late to the party, so to speak. Have you heard of the 5-2 diet? The one where you eat 5 days a week and then you take in no food on the remaining 2 days? Or you can have up to 500 calories on those days, but really why bother at that point? It's now becoming a serious thing. It's being given luster and publicity by the likes of Giselle Bundchen, Jimmy Kimmel, Benedict Cumberbatch, or if you prefer your stars more cerebral than those, economist Paul Krugman, all of whom are said to follow this system and to love it. Well, Armenians have been doing the 5-2 program for 49 weeks or so out of every year since the start of their Christianity. And I might remind you, they kicked off their Christianity with a 5-day full fast at the end of the 65 days of pre-baptismal instruction that St. Gregory put them through so that they would understand what it was that they were getting into, and that they would understand how the faith and its practices had made him, Gregory, so very, very extraordinarily resilient, focused, clear-headed, and agile. As Christians, their same mental clarity could be found through the means that he had used. And fasting was certainly part of the picture. In addition to the Wednesday and Friday fasts from Pentecost to Punparagentan, the Armenian Church also marks the changing seasons and certain major events in the Church's faith history with week-long fasts. This useful list of the longer fasts was made by one of our diocesan clergy, and it gives you a general idea of the times and the events that were found worthy of being dignified with a fast. So you can see the week before Theophany, the fast of the catechumens, then you have Lent, Avak Shapat, the week before Transfiguration, the week of the discovery of St. Gregory's relics, the week before the Assumption of the Mother of God, the week before the exaltation of the cross, the week of Advent, sorry, Eric, 50 days before Theophany, the week of the start of spring, which is sometime in Lent, the week of the start of summer, the fast of Elijah, the week of the start of autumn, which is between the Feast of the Cross of Barak and I think the Feast of St. George, and then the week of the start of winter, the fast of St. James of Nisibis. So yeah, Armenians have always been champion fasters. But why? Is it for the health benefits? Well, on one level, yes, certainly. The fathers agreed that a constantly eating body is a torpid body, not to mention the mental haze, the overall lack of resilience, and the greater vulnerability to disease that come with that. The 5th century Catholicos Jovan Montaguni noted, the person who pampers himself with dainty foods concocts unhealthy ideas. Or as he put it a little more bluntly in another place, a fat stomach doesn't generate holy thoughts. Some of the monastic fathers used the old adage, you are what you eat, to warn their brotherhoods against animal foods. And they would say, well, you really want to be a hog? You really want to be a boar? You really want to be a cow? A sheep? No, you don't. But the limitations of that argument are obvious because no one really wants to be a vegetable either, at least not in an English-speaking world. Are Armenians keen on fasting because of the mental and spiritual clarity and lightness that fasting brings? Well, yes, certainly they are. The fathers used numerous biblical examples to show how impressively holy people, like the prophet Elijah, fasted to good advantage. No one could have accused Elijah of having been low energy, or lacking in dedication, or lacking in the willingness to take big personal risks by speaking God's truth to power. But even Elijah was only clear-headed enough to have an actual presence-to-presence conversation with God in a cave on Mount Sinai after he had fasted 40 days. The great Moses, too, after he led the people of Israel across the Red Sea, still fasted 40 days before meeting with God, not to do more miracles, but to receive the 10 concise commandments by which God desired the people of Israel to live. And then Moses fasted 40 days again in order to intercede on the people's behalf when God was ready to destroy them. And of course, Jesus fasted 40 days after his baptism before demolishing Satan's temptations with Scripture. So the opening of his ministry mirrors the end of his ministry, where he demolished Satan's greatest weapon, death, both of which we bring together in our Lenten fast. The presentation of Jesus as a newborn child to the temple at 40 days was another paradigm for the fast. During the fast, we prepare ourselves for our own presentation, our dedication, our rededication to the risen Lord. So too, there is a sense in which the Lenten fast is our participation in the same kind of preparation as Elijah and the others, with hopefully similar results for our relationship to the divine and for our relationship to the evil that besets us in our world. To quote Catholicos John Montaguni again, don't you know that only those who in a determined way become partakers in the suffering of Christ will be able to share in the glory of the resurrected Christ? Around the turn of the first millennium, Theophilus Vartabed described the Lenten fast as a particularly thrilling chariot race between us and our adversary. He tells us that throughout the course of the fast, Satan will try to run us down or push us off the track. To accomplish this, he has harnessed his chariot to the dark horses of laziness, gluttony, resentment, and adultery. In his sermon on the fifth Sunday of Lent, what Theophilus describes as the 5-mile marker in a 7-mile race, he tells his congregation to harness their spiritual chariots to the 4 sturdy horses of prayer, charity, lack of resentment, and righteous marriage. He encourages his audience to use the clarity of their fasted mind and soul in order to sharpen their weapons, which he describes as words of blessing, charity, thanksgiving, prudence, love, modesty, meekness, and humility, which are powerful against all evil. And he tells them to reach for the prize whose value is 100 or even 1,000 times greater than the effort we put in to attain it. So one would think the manifold physical, mental, and spiritual benefits of fasting and the virtues that it cultivates are surely enough to recommend it to Armenians as a practice. But there is more to it. And Theophilus alludes to this in passing when he refers to the Lenten fast as 7 weeks. And you go, wait a minute, the Lenten fast is 40 days, no? It's modeled on the fast of Elijah, Moses, Jesus, etc., right? Well, yes and no. Armenians fast for 40 days, like everybody else in the Christian world. But whereas other Christians reach the 40 days and call it quits, Armenians do not. After an Armenian has absorbed the benefits of the 40 days, there comes a moment when he or she will realize that Lent carries on for a full 7 weeks, 48 or 49 days. Why? Isn't that just kind of over the top, supererogatory fasting? At that point, aren't Armenians just really showing off? Well, the great 10th or 11th century Vartabed, Samvel Gamurchatoretsy, discusses exactly this point, the extra days of fasting for Armenians. He first describes fasting as a legacy of the Holy Fathers and a revered heritage of the Church. And then he goes on to list and acknowledge all of the associations and the benefits of the 40-day fast. And then he turns his attention to focus on the 7 weeks. Well, obviously, anything involving 7 brings to mind the 7 days of creation, at the end of which we're told on the 7th day, God rested, as he is depicted doing here. And God also commanded that the 7th day be a day of rest for all his people. And so the 7-week fast reminds us that no one has the right to make another or himself work without respite. Rest is not an optional luxury. It is not a privilege. It's a commandment. And not only was 1 day out of 7 set aside by God for rest, but 1 year out of every 7 was set aside as a sabbatical year when all debts were canceled and agricultural work was set aside. So we get it. If 1 day a week is set aside for rest and 1 year in 7 likewise, then fasting for 7 days times 7 is on a smaller scale, a token kind of scale. It's like bringing together the accrued years of rest for 7 resting cycles. Thus, Great Lent in the Armenian tradition is our symbolic offering of rest to the creation, including ourselves, out of devotion to the God who himself rested and in the person of Christ offered rest to all those who are weary. But there are 2 ways of counting the Lenten days. One method will give you 48 days. The other will give you 49. Well, for Samvel Vartabed, both those numbers are fine. They both work. He associated them with 2 Old Testament stories. One of them is found in the 35th chapter of the book of Numbers, and the other one is found in the 25th chapter of Leviticus. 2 of those biblical books that pretty much no one reads anymore, but Armenians derived very rich insights from them. For people who count the fasting days as 48, Samvel says, keeping the fast is a beautiful thing because it reminds those people that when Joshua was portioning out the promised land, or the land of good news, the land of the gospel, as Armenian calls it, when he was portioning out that land that they had just entered, they haven't conquered it yet, he's portioning it out to the tribes of Israel. No land was given to the priestly tribe of Levi. Instead, they received special cities within the lands that had been allotted to other tribes. And so you could see in the slide the name of the tribe, its territory is delineated for you. And within that, you can see how many cities each tribe was supposed to set aside for the priestly class to live in. As a combined reading of Numbers 35 and Joshua 21 tells us, command the children of Israel, said God, that from the inheritance of their possessions, they give to the Levites cities to dwell in, and you shall give the Levites suburbs for their cities. The cities shall be for them to dwell in, and the suburbs shall be for their cattle, for their goods, and for all their beasts. And then Joshua adds, all the cities of the Levites within the lands of the children of Israel were 48 cities with their suburbs. 48. Thus, as Samuel saw it, the 48 days of the fast are a priestly time period. They are there for us to think about our priestly inheritance as Christians in a land that is not our own possession. And it's a chance to think about our priestly responsibilities to the land in which we live as well. From a slightly different point of view, keeping the 48-day fast is also a beautiful thing because of these 48 cities that you will give, Leviticus says, 6 cities shall you have for refuge. They shall be for you cities of refuge from the avenger, so that the manslayer does not die before he stands in front of the congregation for judgment. In other words, of those 48 cities, 6 were designated as refuges for people who had harmed or killed another person. According to the ethics of the time, the relatives of a person who was harmed were obligated to hunt down the offender in righteous anger and take summary revenge on that person, rightfully or wrongfully. So those offenders who were able to reach a priestly city of refuge were protected by the priests from vengeance seekers until such time as they could come to a true trial and a verdict, a just verdict, be delivered in their case. And if the reigning high priest died before the trial happened, the offender was allowed to return to his home without fear that vengeance would be exacted against him when he left the city. So, said Samuel, now Adam and all his descendants, meaning us, are killers. If in no other way than that by the force of our passions we have killed our own souls. He doesn't mention, although others did, the problem of ill will that we have borne towards others, or bad things that we have wished for them even momentarily, or resentment that we have harbored perhaps towards them, or any harsh soul-harming words or actions we may have directed towards them. And it leaves completely out of the accounting our inevitable in this complicated world, complicity in enabling the endangerment of workers' lives and health when we purchase products that are made by unethically oppressive companies. We may not be able to avoid it. And yet, says Samuel, we all have need of refuge. And he goes on, the 48 days of the fast are for us a refuge like the priestly cities. And when Christ, our high priest, dies on Easter, we are free. The other story that Samuel brought to his audience was for those who count the fasting days as 49. In the 25th chapter of Leviticus, God sets apart the 49th year, in other words, the end of every 7th sabbatical year cycle. He sets aside that year as the eve before a great coming day or year of rest and restoration. Leviticus says, count off 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 Sabbaths of years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement. Sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each one of you is to return to his family property, and each to his own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest untended vines. For it is a jubilee, and it is to be holy for you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields. In this year of jubilee, everyone is to return to his own property. If you sell land to one of your countrymen or buy any from him, I think before the Jubilee year, do not take advantage of each other regarding those sales. So in the 49th year, people could look forward to the coming season when not only would debts be forgiven, but any land that had been sold or that had been lost or that had been taken would have to be returned to its rightful owner. Remember that this is in a society where land is assigned, so one could keep track of those things. It was a time of personal liberty. Slaves were to be manumitted in this year. It was a time of restitution, of relinquishing or letting go things that one had profited by for the previous years. It was a year for simplicity of life. Ideally, at least in the Jubilee year, one eats what one has stored up, allowing the fruit of the trees and the plants to go to seed, fulfilling their natural cycle of life. Thus, fasting in the Armenian tradition, particularly in Great Lent and Avak Shapat, isn't about giving things up, although we do that. And certainly there are a whole range of regulations that lay out different acceptable, uplifting ways to do that. Instead, this extended fasting period is about giving the world, our things, other people, and ourselves a rest. We might never know from looking at a normal Armenian table in Lent that this is what it's for, that it is for simplification of life. But it is, it's about releasing what we have taken for our own use. It's about returning resources to their source. It's about allowing ourselves to replenish. It's about allowing the seas to replenish themselves and the soil to lie fallow so that it can enjoy gathering its strength. It can enjoy simply lying under the sun and the rain with no obligations to us. It's about giving the body's digestive system a rest. It's about giving the animal world a reprieve from our constant and overwhelming demands. To say nothing of a respite from our knives and slaughterhouses and grinders, our grills and our forks and our pots and our ovens and our platters. And according to the fathers, fasting is also about giving rest to all the people who along the invisible production chain labor to prepare our food. Fasting foods are not only to be vegan, they are also to be simple enough that we ourselves can prepare them using our own hands, not the hands and the labor of others. So in these weeks, when we are being forced by the onslaught of a rogue virus to give the world a break from our ceaseless, frenetic, and laborsome movement, it's worth considering how we might intentionalize what we are experiencing, how to make the practical and the spiritual transition from being victims who have been forced to give up our treasured habits to being Sabbath keepers who make these last days of fasting before Easter and beyond this into a gift of love to the planet and to its inhabitants, that God, who himself rested, made for us to inhabit, to share, to cultivate, and to enjoy together. Thank you.
I get a clap. Other people can clap too. Thank you.
You are welcome.
So what we can do is take some questions, but I think, let me make sure that I can see a few more people. And I think probably the easiest way to do that is to like, maybe in chat, if you know that you have a question, just say something, just give me a little, cue or something in question. And then that way I can maybe direct people's questions, because otherwise there are now 33 of us, which is awesome. But that might take a little directing. So if you have a thought, just in the chat, kind of let me know, and then I'll kind of direct people.
I had a question. What was it? Hmm.
And you also, a couple other people, I muted a couple people, so you have to make sure that you're unmuted too if you do want to talk. So I guess I can try. Oops, what did I do here? Oh, I can. Oh, I see. We're still viewing.
I never thought of, oops.
I don't know who that was, but I have a question from somebody that they wrote, which was, how did people manage their food situation during the full year of fast?
You were supposed to store up in the previous year. You were supposed to be forethoughtful and have in mind, you were supposed to know your own kind of intake, and then you were supposed to be actively setting aside things for use the next year.
And it looks like related to that, you mentioned that then there would be like slaves would be freed.
Yes.
But
They would be given the choice to stay or go. And there was a ceremony for slaves who decided to stay. If they bypassed or did not want to take up their offer of freedom, they could go to the door of the house, the doorposts of the house, and the master would bore through the servant's ear with an awl, so effectively giving him an earring. And he would wear an earring that would be the signal that he had loved his family so much that he chose to continue to serve them for the rest of his life. Or her life.
I have a question. Does anyone think about the fast being a rest time for them during this time? Now,
I have no idea. I think it's been very much on my mind because this virus thing has coincided with Lent. And so while my schedule actually remains the same, we're doing all of our teaching electronically now, and we're starting to do services electronically as well. There is something restful about it. There is something quiet about it. And in a way, we're not taking up as much space and making as much noise as we normally would. For other people, I cannot speak. I hope it's true that they do.
it was a novel idea for me, but it has been restful.
Mm-hmm. So a little lesson in how Lent should be.
we have a question that's related to that, which is about, given rest during a particular season, but, there are the fasting days throughout the year, but, why big chunks of fasting? Why big, especially if it's about rest too?
As you're preparing for some of the major feasts, now not to us, they don't all seem like major feasts. Like the Feast of James of Nisibis does not in the present day seem to us like a major feast, but it has a whole week of fasting attached to it, reflecting the importance that he had in Armenian tradition. And so the proper preparation for greeting something that had had momentous impact on one's faith and life was to clarify, clear away, rest, and prepare to greet it with full energy. Be my understanding of it.
And there's a nice kind of good broad question that I think is really interesting about, would those Sabbath years actually have led people to appreciate God's created world more deeply?
One would think. When you actually have time to look at it, and when you're not simply regarding it as the source of your next meal, your brain has leisure to appreciate it for what it is. And we all experience this even when we go on vacation, I think. You sit by the water for 10 minutes and you have a whole new appreciation for the rhythm of life and the coming in and the going out, the kind of breathing in and breathing out that the world does all around us without our even active knowledge of it.
There's a couple other, so people, I guess apparently there is a feature that one can like raise their hand, which I am still learning everything. And I would love, people are typing out their comments then questions, which I think is lovely, but what I was hoping actually was that you would just sort of ping me and then you could ask them. I don't want to do all the talking. So I see, Ryan, why don't you ask your question?
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ervine, for this lovely talk. I think it's in some ways very timely, clearly. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about Roberta Boraci's comment on priestly responsibilities toward the land. What did he mean by that? Is it just giving it a break every once in a while, or is there more to it than that?
I gathered that it was more of a custodial thing. And of course, they're more concerned with shepherding the people on the land than they are with actually agricultural involvement with the land. But yeah, how do you support people who are in an agricultural society? How do you help people to keep the understanding of why you bring sacrifices, why you praise God? What is that all about? Why do you do it in this specific place? The bringing of people closer to the divine is a priestly responsibility. And it's whether it's the people or the land, but obviously for the priests themselves, it would be more for the people. For us, it would be more concerning the land.
Yeah, I think there might be a connection too with having to prepare the food with our own hands and not counting on other people to prepare it for us. It gives us more of a sense of what it is that we're doing with the food, with our bodies, and there's more of a connection than getting some prepackaged meal from Trader Joe's or something like this. And I wonder, you know, I grew up in the Central Valley, so there is much more of a sense of connection to our food. I remember driving by fields of cattle and my dad calling them hamburgers, for example. But you know, we live in a world that's very disconnected, in a society rather that's very disconnected from where we actually get our food.
Yeah. As an urban person, someone who grew up in an urban setting, I remember the shock that I felt when I first realized that chickens actually walk around. They're not just there in a little plastic, nicely covered package. They have feathers. And in order to get them into that nicely covered package, you have to stuff them into a machine and slit their throats. That revolutionized my life and my understanding of how I ate, for sure. And I'm sure other people have had similar experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ani, I'm impressed you're still awake. Do you want to ask your question?
Hi. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Roberta.
Hi, Ani.
Hi. Very, very interesting talk. A very a good challenge for all of us, for hearts, minds, body, soul, strength, which is through the stomach is what I'm understanding with fast. But I was wondering, my question is more about how would an Armenian rest? You know, we rest the body by, you know, the fast really does rest the body in many ways. But I wonder if you would give one or two maybe insights about how an Armenian understood rest.
Well, in the time when
yes,
these guys were writing, it's a very agricultural society. And so fortunately, Great Lent comes usually right before planting season. So it's the kind of hiatus time anyway, where you're getting ready to do a lot of things, but you do have the opportunity not to spend all day, every day in the fields at hard labor. So it's perfectly timed from that point of view. And resting includes certainly spending more time outdoors, spending more time with family, spending more time visiting, which is something people love doing anyway. We can't right now, but we will.
Anyone else? You could pop up and just say things at this point if you want. I think it clearly hasn't been chaos yet, so.
I was wondering how the fathers related to landless poor people, or what they would say about refugees. How do we bring this forward more into our own time now?
In Armenia, they went through various ways of trying to help out with this and deal with it. So we had notable Catholicoses who dedicated their careers and a lot of their income to making sure that there were not exactly institutions, but buildings, places where people could go to actually take refuge, or whether they were financially in difficulty, whether they were transiting through the country from somewhere else, whether they were sick, to make sure that and that was primarily done through the church. So it would have been a bishop's prerogative. Many of them did it very well, or monasteries, obviously.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk, by the way. So in the past few years, I've kind of been seeing new ways to observe Lent that are about adding things in rather than giving up, which are not so much based in rest, but based in conscious activity and deeds. For example, I actually tried this last year. There's an organization that gives you one good deed, a specific good deed every day to do during Lent, and they progress in how difficult and involved they are. Just to remind you, to make more space for the Lord in your daily life by doing things like glorify Him and hopefully multiplying the good deeds as they're repeated. So I was just wondering, is there any? I found it really valuable, although it was the opposite of restful. And I was just wondering if there's any historical precedent or kind of liturgical support to that approach to Lent.
Yes, there is.
Nice.
The other side of fasting, and all of the fathers say this, is it really doesn't matter in the long run if you're just fasting from food, if you're still going about your normal way of being cranky, unable to participate with other people properly, if you're ignoring your neighbors and so on. So yes, they said that certainly above the food regulations, there's also regulations about A, fasting from harsh words, and B, increasing the number of good, kind, and uplifting words that come out of one's mouth during this time, with the hope that that's going to carry over far beyond the food fasting. The food fasting in a way draws your attention to these other things because you have time to think about it. You also have the synapses free to think about it and the blood vessels that aren't busy digesting to think about it. So you can turn your attention in that direction. So yes, I would say you're absolutely right about that.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I guess this is just a comment to what you just mentioned in thinking about how many times and for how many periods throughout the year fasting was observed. In some ways, it really feels like it puts in perspective how much correction we need throughout our life, right? If it's happening for almost 5 months of a 12-month cycle, that's a pretty, that strikes a pretty big chord. It's like,
Yeah, we all need a reset.
like apparently frequently and often.
Well, yeah, I know that's true for me, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is just a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
One of the major things that I understood after celebrating a few Lents is it's a remarkable thing to live non-violently and then suddenly come upon Good Friday and struck to the core by that violence and that death.
Mhm. Yes. I think that's intentional.
I wondered, how did the other religions behave in this period as far as fasting goes?
Other religions as other forms of Christian faith?
Well, at whatever time period you're talking about, there was just a Jewish religion, and that was probably the
Well,
only.
Jews fast twice a week,
Mhm.
and they also fast for Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So
Right.
it's part of everyone's tradition. It's just
Yes.
how it's done.
Now, since this was fasting was put among the people, and the various religions have multiplied since all this period. Are some of those traditions still maintained? I know among the Jewish people that's retained, but some of the other religions, do they have these fasting periods? Not so much for the land, but as far as their own dietary concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think even non-religious people have it now, as people are becoming more aware.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear who you said.
I think even non-religious people have it now as they're becoming more aware of the benefits of it.
Right.
So hopefully the people who do have it as part of their traditional observance will be more mindful of what they actually already have built in,
right,
and take advantage of it.
Really fascinating stuff.
Well, I think that if there are no other questions, we can all thank Dr. Ervine again. There's a way, this one I did learn. Where's my little reactions? I can give a little hand clap there. Yeah, that one I've learned how to do. So thank you again, Dr. Ervine. This was really lovely. I think this was a wonderful, wonderful start to this. I will just say, while I still have everybody on the line here, it is my hope to do, I've got 2 more enrichment evenings scheduled through this season, through another one in April and one more in May. I'm still in conversation with those 2 presenters if they are willing to come with us to the online world here, because it's it's different to speak without an actual physical audience. So I'm hoping that they will all say, both of them will say yes, and I will just say, please follow the Zorab Information Center's website, and or if you email me, I will make sure that you get on our MailChimp mailing list, because I will send the dates and times once I've figured this out. And keep this meeting ID and password. I can send it to you again, of course, but what I've done is I've set up a recurring meeting for these enrichment evenings. So that way, all you need to do next time is know when and on what day that the event will be, and we should be all set. If you can't find it, I'm happy to send it again, but then it just kind of hopefully makes it easier on everybody that way. So like I said, I have not confirmed with my other speakers yet. I'm sort of hoping that since this went so well, they will be inclined to do so. And I hope that we will get to do this a couple more times in the next month or 2. And then I hope that after that, we won't have to do it like this. But for at least the next 2, I hope that we are able to do it this way. So thank you again, Dr. Ervine, and thank you all for coming out and joining us this way this evening.
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Hi. Thank you, Chris, for setting this up.
Thank you, Roberta.